Hey everyone, I'm Hashim, welcome back to Pushing Film. Today I'm going to talk about the new Negative Supply Light Source Mini for digitizing or scanning your film at home, share my thoughts on it, whether I think it's worth it, and where it stands in the growing lineup of light sources that you can get for scanning film. So Negative Supply did send me this, but there's no expectations on the video, so I'm just going to give you my honest thoughts and what I think you should do depending on where you are in your film scanning setup and journey. Prior to this, I've always recommended things like this video light. This Viltrox L116T has been something I've been recommending for years now, and that I still recommend until today as a great all-rounder. And I just want to highlight the viability of using something like this, but then also go into why you might want something different. Because something like this does work perfectly fine, it is going to be cheaper, and it does double as a video light as well, or a light you can use for photography or products or whatever else. So it has that versatility. And prior to this new Light Source Mini, Negative Supply had some film scanning lights available for a while. One of which, and I think one of the more popular ones, was this 99 CRI Light Source Basic, which I've talked about before on the channel, especially in my light source comparison video, which I'll put a card for in case you're interested in that. But this one was $299 US. So it was a big jump up from something like the 100 roughly that you would spend for a video light. And if you've already seen that video, or if you choose to watch that later, what I would remind you of something that I spoke about in that video was that there's hardly any difference when you're jumping up from a 95 CRI to a 99 CRI light, for example. And if you're not sure what that is, it's basically the quality of the light output, and it affects how well the colors might come out when you're digitizing C41 color film especially. But the biggest rewards you'd get are from jumping up from a really lower quality light source like, one of these cheaper tracing pads like this Huon one that I've got here. When you jump up from one of those lower quality lights to something with, let's say, 95 plus high quality light output, that's when you really notice the difference. So again, watch that video if you want to see those breakdowns and comparisons. But there's diminishing returns when you go up from 95 and beyond CRI ratings. And there's probably more to it than that, but that's just a good anchor to kind of judge light sources at surface level before you go down deeper and really make in-depth comparisons. And now what they've introduced is the Light Source Mini, which is 97 CRI as opposed to 99. It has a smaller cutout, so one of the main differences is that you can't do 4x5 film in case that was something that you were after. But the big difference that's worth talking about is that this one is actually a lot brighter in terms of light output compared to their previous 99 CRI Light Source Basic. So yeah, this Light Source Mini is an upgrade of sorts to the 99 CRI Basic, even though it's actually cheaper. It comes in at $249 US, and even though it's 97 CRI, again, that difference is going to be negligible. So the only major drawback is if you plan to scan 4x5 film. And with that extra brightness that this new Light Source Mini offers, you're going to get a lot higher shutter speeds, probably 3 or 4 stops, which does start to make a difference, and I'll talk more about that soon. But first of all, if you're someone who's just getting into this, or you use a cheaper video light or tracing table, what are going to be the pros and cons of stepping up to a dedicated film scanning light? I haven't touched on this too much, but I've made a list of pros and cons for you to consider why it might be worth using a dedicated film scanning light or just repurposing something like a tracing pad or a video light. All right, so the first pro of using a dedicated light for scanning film is that it's built for the job. It doesn't have to share the task with, like an LED panel would for maybe doing video work or photography lighting if you happen to use your video light for multiple purposes. The second big pro is that it doesn't have to be diffused, meaning that if you're using a film holder that doesn't already have a diffuser, such as one of the film holders from Negative Supply themselves, you don't need to then have a diffuser to make the light source suitable for scanning film, because the light coming out of one of these video lights is going to have those little dots that I've talked about that will come out in your scans, meaning you need to have a quality diffuser, ideally like the one from the EFH that's built into it, or even get an add-on diffuser like this one from Negative Supply being the basic 35mm carrier. The third pro is that it's a higher quality light in terms of the actual output. A dedicated film scanning light will give you better output than your average tracing pad, or using your smartphone or tablet, or even something like the Kaiser Slim Light Mini. You'll generally get a better quality light output, and therefore scans from using a dedicated film scanning light source. The next pro for a dedicated light is that these tend to be stable and non-slip compared to using something like a video light, which, I do recommend, but I have mentioned some of the drawbacks, like the fact that these often have knobs or a battery on the back, in which case you'd have to have it on the table, but it can move around a lot more. And I know I've shared hacks for that where I maybe put a piece of blue tack on the the mount there to stop it from swiveling around. But, it's still not quite as good as having a purpose-built light that has that non-slip stability where it sits on the table and you don't have to worry about messing around with, things that I've just talked about. The next big pro is that it's going to be a hard-powered light. When you go for something like one of these dedicated film scanning lights, you don't really have the option to run it off a battery, but that is usually more suitable for doing something like film scanning. And you can see that as a pro, especially if you're getting something that needs to have battery power or you have to pay more for the adapter. The next pro to getting a dedicated film scanning light is that they're going to be easily adaptable to accessories like film holders and so on from the same brand. So for example, with these negative supply lights, it's easily adaptable to their film holders using these little masks and adapters that just kind of sit on there and make a perfect fit depending on the accessory you're planning to use, which compared to something like using one of these video lights, I've shared methods like where I've put gaffer tape to mask off the surrounding area, and it still sometimes allows for a little bit of movement of the film holder depending on what you're using. So again, it kind of falls into that purpose-built aspect that I've mentioned, but that adaptability can be quite a pro if you're planning on doing a lot of scanning. You don't want to mess around a lot. All right, so now getting into the cons of using a dedicated light for film scanning. The big one, the main one that I'm sure all of you are aware of is that it's just going to be a lot more expensive. Getting a dedicated light for scanning film compared to just getting a tracing pad or, one of these Viltrox lights or similar like ones from Relino is that you're going to pay more. It's going to be maybe double or more the price. So you need to make sure that those pros that I've mentioned so far are worth that extra cost to you. The second con is that they're only really suitable for film scanning, which is the same pro that I've mentioned in the previous list. So you can see it both ways. The fact that these are only suitable for film scanning means they're not as suitable for use as like a video light. There's no hot shoe mount, even though you could use it for some at-home product photography or video, they're purpose-built for scanning film. So you can see that as a con as well. But all in all, it's great to have more options on the market, especially for those who are just getting into digitizing their own film or progressing into that journey, getting deeper into it and wanting to upgrade their equipment and really enjoying self-digitization of film, which is becoming more popular now with the rising cost of film and for people who plan to keep on doing it into the future. And as far as I'm concerned, this new 97 CRI light source mini from Negative Supply completely supersedes their previous 99 CRI light source basic while offering better performance where it matters, which is brightness. And even though it has an ever so slightly lower CRI of 97, that's pretty much negligible, and I'd much rather have faster shutter speeds, which means quicker scanning and less chances of camera shake or blur creeping into your scans. So have a look at the difference in shutter speed that I was able to use for this same frame with both light sources, being the 97 CRI light source mini and the previous 99 CRI light source basic. So the difference between the two is about 3 or 4 stops. And on this densely exposed frame of Kodak, you can see that I got 1/15 of a second on the light source mini, whereas the 99 CRI light source basic was 0.8 seconds. So that's almost a second exposure time, which can be prone to creating blur in some frames. And you can actually see with this same frame where I wasn't too careful with stillness and only used the 2-second timer on the camera rather than using a wireless remote, you can see that actually a little bit of blur did creep in, which was somewhat intentional, that I wasn't going to be overly careful because I know some people might scan just using the 2-second timer or the button on their camera. You are going to have a higher chance of blur with shutter speeds that get down towards 1 second. So I'll put a few more comparisons up on the screen between these two light sources just to demonstrate how much brighter the light source mini is going to be. I mean, you can actually see it in the B-roll. The new 97 CRI light source mini is a lot brighter. It's about 4 stops, so you're going to get higher shutter speeds on average. And another example with black and white 35mm film that I tried scanning, I was able to achieve 1/30th of a second with the light source mini, whereas with the 99 CRI light source basic, it was 1/4 of a second. So again, that can make a difference, especially in terms of reducing chances of blur, but also in terms of the speed at which you can get through a roll of film. You can just click that shutter, move on to the next frame that little bit faster, therefore just streamlining things a little bit. And if you're curious how that compares in brightness to something like the Viltrox L116T, which I've always recommended, the results were very similar. So with the new light source mini, the brightness allowed me to shoot at 1/30th of a second on a frame of black and white, whereas the Viltrox was 1/25th of a second. So that's more or less the same. And I had this at 100% brightness, but of course diffused, because this needs to be diffused. So with 100% brightness and a diffuser of something like the EFH, it brought the exposure time to being very similar with the new light source mini. But then comparing that to something like the Huon, the light tracing table, that gave me 0.3 seconds, about a third of a second compared to the 1/30th of that. So that's much dimmer and of course lower light quality when you're looking at something like the Huon. Some more comparisons you'll be seeing on the screen now are from C41 120 film. Again, light source mini gave me a faster shutter speed of 1/40th of a second compared to the previous 99 CRI basic of 1/5 of a second. And then the Huon light table gave 0.3 seconds, all at the same f-stop, which was f7 in the case of this frame of 120. All right, so in terms of light output and scanning quality for color film, comparing the 97 CRI light source mini and the 99 CRI basic, there's hardly any difference. I'll just make this section brief, show you a couple of examples in terms of color film. The output in terms of the results is very hard to see the difference. Again, like I mentioned, between 95 plus CRI to 99, you're not going to see a huge jump up in color quality and scanning consistency. But when I compare one of these same frames to the scan made with the Huon light table, for example, you can see the difference there. You can see the deterioration in the color quality, in the depth and tonality, and some of the casts in the shadows and highlights. So I've already established that difference before. Again, I've got a separate video on that. And then also comparing the quality to the Viltrox, you're not going to see a huge difference in terms of output. You just need to pass that threshold of something decent, usually meaning 95 CRI plus. So in conclusion, I still think something like the Viltrox L116T or similar makes the best all-round option in terms of value for money, especially when using something like the EFH, which does have a great diffuser built into it, or if you have some other film holder that you've added a diffuser to or comes with a diffuser. But it may not be suitable for someone who's using a film carrier that doesn't have a diffuser, like one of the pro grade ones from Negative Supply or other brands. So if you have a mid-range or pro grade setup, getting something more dedicated might be worth it for you. And in that case, I would skip over the 99 CRI light source basic completely and just go for this new, cheaper and brighter 97 CRI light source mini from Negative Supply. I do think it just makes a better option overall, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're just going to discontinue this one sooner or later. Unless, of course, you plan to digitize 4x5 sheet film, in which case the light source mini will not work out. But given that most people do 35 and or 120 roll film, this would be a suitable upgrade if you're looking to step up from a generic LED or build a decent mid-range or high-end film digitizing setup. So as I always say, more options on the market is always a good thing overall. Sure, it makes it harder to pick which one to go for, but personally, I'd rather have more choices. And with the current price hierarchy, you have high-end light sources like the professional ones from Negative Supply that go for $500-ish US plus, all the way down to the cheaper options like the tracing pads and, lower end video lights for $50 to $100. So it's great to have options that kind of sit in the middle there, like this new light source mini, which offers great performance and practicality advantages that might sweeten the deal a little bit if you're planning to get something in the mid-range there. All right, so that's pretty much it. Those are my thoughts on the new Negative Supply light source mini. I think it's a great option. I think it just replaces the 99 CRI basic. It brings that price point down a little bit for the higher end and mid-range lights. It's still not as expensive as the really high-end pro setups, but it is more expensive than getting something like a simple video light. So consider that list of pros and cons, figure out if those advantages are worth it for you, if you're just investing in a light source or upgrading your existing setup. So that's it. I hope this video shed some light on the situation, no pun intended, and that it was helpful in some way. Let me know in the comments what you've been using, if you've tried one of these new Negative Supply lights or you have something as an alternative for a similar price point. Share it in the comments. It might be helpful to someone. Thanks for watching another Pushing Film video, and I'll see you in the next episode.